This conference will now be recorded.
All right, it's 6 p.m. on 11 July 2024. I'd like to call this meeting of the Rome City Council to order.
Bow your heads and close your eyes. Dear the Father, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for everything that you bless us with. Lord, I pray that you please just continue to be with this city. We thank you for the provision that you just continue to place upon the city. I pray that you will please just allow those that are elected in office to make the right decisions for the citizens of Rome. And I pray that you will please just continue to be with our fire chief and our police chief. I pray that you will please just allow them to have wisdom and guidance, especially as they continue to look out for the citizens of this city. Lord, I pray that you'll please just continue to be with our mayor and our city administrator. I pray that you'll please just lead them and guide them. And God, I pray that you'll please just have your hand of favor upon this city. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
At this time, are there any public comments?
No, sir.
Announcements. Let's see. July 24th, the city offices will be closed at 1 p.m. for staff development. July 25th is our next regularly scheduled city council meeting at 6 p.m. Before we go to council announcements, does the council have any announcements? Uh, I've been made aware from several of our citizens that they're having trouble hearing us over the live stream feed. I know our equipment's old and it's not the best we got, but until the budget allows, we got what we got. So, and I'm probably the world's worst here, so if we could all make an effort to speak more clearly, and I know I sound like I'm yelling into this thing, speak loudly and clearly into our microphones when we speak, and try to do that for the people at home that can't be here. And also at this time, if you have any electronic devices, could you please put them on silent? Thank you. Moving on to the monthly consent agenda. I'd like to move item number 2 to the first position in the regular agenda as it deals with funding, and we probably need to let the council discuss that one. All right. For the rest of the consent agenda, do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Make a motion to accept that consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. Thank you. The monthly staff report. Staff.
There in the packet, sir, but we're here to answer questions if anybody has any.
I'd just like to say kudos to Officer Garrett for training this that officer's been through. Takes time out of his former schedule to go do all that training. So, okay, moving on. At this time, it is 6:03. We will conduct a public hearing to consider a variance request for one tract of land legally described as acres lot 8, block 20, original town Rome. Do we have anyone that would wish to speak on this issue? Sir, please go to the dais and speak in the microphone. Thank you. Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, keep it close. Yes, thank you all for taking time out of your evening to hear my case. So about a year ago, I purchased a lot in a subdivision off of West First Street in the original town of Rome, and purchased the lot with cash. The sellers told me that it was the buyer who was buying their house wanted the house, but there was a smaller lot next door that buyers didn't want. And so they sold me the lot next door and said, you can build a house here and we'll sell it to you. So I bought it over a year ago. And then I went through the drafting process to draft plans for a house and submitted it to the city. And lo and behold, found out that the lot is too small to be built upon for the city zoning guidelines for that neighborhood. And each book has a lot of 10,000 square foot, and that lot is 5,250 square feet, half the size. So then I was, now I'm trying to figure out what to do, and some people mentioned, I've sued the people, and I, talked to different people about that, and ended up spending more money than the lot is worth, and probably end up right here before you all, just the same, asking for what I'm asking for, which is a couple different options. The lot happens to be next to a lot that's owned by the city, and which was originally going to be used for, I believe it's Elm Street, to be, is it Elm? Elm to continue on through that neighborhood to Second Street. And that never happened, so now it's really just a grassy lot and two grassy lots backing up to each other that haven't been used. They're not in use. So I have a lot that basically is at an undue hardship, if you will, that literally cannot be used for anything. It's next to city land that's not being used for anything. And what I'm requesting is that if I can something purchase, or if you can auction, or if you want more land for the city, if you can purchase my unusable lot and use for city usage. I just can't pay taxes on this forever and not have any use for it. Kids, grandkids, so I'm asking the council to help me out with this conundrum. So any questions? Feel free to
Questions?
This is public hearing right now.
Yeah, questions would come under the regular agenda.
Any other public comment? All right, no public comments. 6:07, we will end the public hearing on this matter. And now we will move to the regular agenda. And let's go down to item number 1 there, which is this variance request we just had the public hearing about. I'd like to open this up to the council for discussion.
So I don't know what options we would have here because we don't have a lot of city-owned property, and I would rather not sell city-owned property. So I'm not sure that there's anything else we can do. That is correct that he cannot build on that lot. That lot is too small to build.
That is correct. According to the zoning in that area, the lot is, as Mr. King said, about half the size of what is required for homes in the Old Town overlay. So it's a little bit of a challenge, and he's come to council before, and staff were directed to continue to try and work with him to figure out some path forward. There just doesn't seem to be anything other than the option that we had suggested, either that we purchase the property from him in some form or fashion, or the city consider selling some of its property to him to increase the lot size. I will tell you, in talking with our city attorney, Carvin does not recommend that we sell any property until we have a clear picture of what we are going to do holistically as a capital improvement plan. Whether the road goes through that area or not remains to be seen. That's been on and off thoroughfare plans from as far back as I can tell. It is shown at the county level. It is not shown at the city level. I can also tell you that planning and zoning heard this back in May, and they did not recommend granting the variance. We did have one resident come forward and speak against the property or against the variance request to build a smaller home, but they're not here this evening. So I know Mr. King finds himself in a really difficult position, and that's hard to not be able to help him. But at this point, I don't really have any options that we can extend in order to help in this type of a situation.
Can I say something real quick? Just to speak to that. So, real quick. I think she had mentioned the planning and zoning that I met with. And they did recommend to deny it, but that was because it hadn't been heard by the city council yet. And that they really, their hands were tied. They weren't. From what I was gathering, they were willing to work some sort of solution out, but they wanted y'all were the ones who have the jurisdiction over the matters. That's right.
So the conversation there centered around the same type of things that Mr. King brought forward, that we either purchase his property or we sell him stuff. And that's not something that the Planning and Zoning Committee have purview over. That's a council level discussion. So we brought it back through the formal channels in order for this to be reviewed at the council level to determine if one of those two options exists or is something that you all would consider. Back when Mr. King started bringing this forward to us, we discussed the fact that the zoning in that area did not allow for a build on that size of a lot. And the only way to get him formally in front of either P&Z or council, he had to pay the variance fee and come forward through the right channels, because as city administrator, we don't have administrative authority to deal with this on our level. So really council's only two options to consider in this particular instance is you grant the variance and you have a small home, or should I say a long linear home on a small lot, and you do have pictures of the lot in your packet. You also have pictures of the survey boundary on your packet that Mr. King has provided there off of West First Street. It's probably about a little more than halfway through your packet itself. And then I did go over into that area and I took some photos from different views to show you kind of the current open space that exists that the city owns, and then the houses that are already built in that particular block.
Clarify something from my own understanding here. Is the problem actually the size of the home that's planned, or it's actually the lot itself? So even if you cut it down to like
The setbacks,
small home, so
the setbacks on the lot are not going to meet the lot dimensions.
I should say something to that. We did come up with a house plan that actually does fit within the setback limitations for the neighborhood. But the house, like she said, is kind of a shotgun style house that would be very linear and long, because the lot is long, but it's narrow. It's not very wide. So I was requesting if I could get at least 15 foot, 10 feet more, then I could have a lot that would be much more doable. To build a normal sized house. That would also work. Just a portion of 10, 15 foot width would work as well.
So, you spoke of us buying it or if selling it. What you're asking for out of this property.
Right now, we can't, that's not what's being discussed on the agenda. It's merely the denial or the allowance of the variance request.
I'll at least speak to what I paid for my lot. I'll leave that for
That would
another.
be something to be discussed
In private.
under a different meeting.
Okay, yes, sir.
Yes.
And so did P&Z just hear
They
this?
recommended denial of the variance request.
This was in May?
Yes.
But
Amanda, with this map that shows the different lots, which of these are owned by the city? I believe the lot that Mr. King is talking about is 771182.
So the
So you see on that piece of paper where it shows South Elm Street going through,
Yes, ma'am.
that does not go through.
Okay.
that's actually the grassy lot.
So the document that you're referring to, Mrs. King, is what's on the county's website, which is a little bit misleading because it does indicate that there is a thoroughfare or street that's built there, but currently there is not.
Okay. Thank you.
And that's part of what confused me when I bought the lot, that there's this huge grassy area, and they informed me you're getting this portion, and the survey looked like that portion, and then we found out later that's actually a street thoroughfare, and you can't build it. So that's why I'm here to pay variance fees.
If this was at P&Z and they said it's not in their purview, so they pushed it to council, is that correct?
Yes.
So there isn't really us saying yes or no on the variance because there wasn't a variance denial then. Is that correct?
The recommendation was to deny the variance request.
Okay.
The ancillary questions or the accompanying questions about if it's denied and he can't do anything with it, do we want to buy it or just do we want to sell him additional property? That's not something that's on the agenda for this evening.
Okay.
I'm ready to make the motion.
No further discussion? All right, do we entertain a motion to approve or deny the variance request?
With the lot size as it is, to deny the variance request.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Motion made, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
But I would like to see this built back to that question.
Yes. Am I able to make a motion or whatever to ask?
No, sir, the council would have to make a motion to add this on to the next agenda. Next regular meeting.
Yes.
Move on to the next agenda item would be the one from the consent agenda, item number 2, the TML cybersecurity data breach response coverage. I believe that was one we would like to cover.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So as part of our insurance coverage or our defense against the cybersecurity attack, we are part of a current policy with Texas Municipal League, our insurer, that provides us some basic amount of coverage in the event that our systems are infiltrated or we have an issue with compromised data. And they have sent us notification that based on their first few years, and I don't know how long they've been administering this particular pool of insurance, but they are changing the rates and they are changing the coverage clauses, if you will, and it's in your packet. Currently, we are paying about $175 a year, I believe. Let me look at the contract right quick. Yeah, $175 a year, and they are moving that to $1,000 at the core level, which is what we have, or $1,250 at the core plus level for the 2024 budget year. And you will see on some of your support documentation on page 4 of 4, there is a chart that says limit page. It looks like this. That will tell council what the differences are between those two levels of coverage. And what we would need is a motion and or direction to either A, continue the coverage at the core level with TML if that's something council's interested in, or we could continue it at the core plus level, or we could seek additional coverage, but I'm not sure that we're going to find anything more comprehensive than what we currently get with TML, as they insure the majority of cities across the state of Texas. And they are able to leverage that pool and provide coverage to all of us at a cheaper rate.
Now, with these policies, typically, there will be stipulations for your coverage that you have to provide a minimum amount, consider certain items for self-protection against these intrusions. So, what type of, if we agree to for coverage, are there any additional requirements that also?
I don't see anything in this documentation that indicates that, Mr. Roth.
But we do have, didn't we just upgrade our software security and everything?
We did do some of that through our technology consultant. There is on page 3, there's a paragraph that says what you need to do to continue coverage. And at this point, they're saying we have to review, complete, and sign the ILA or the interlocal agreement to continue at the floor level. It doesn't list anything extra. It does ask us to look at the 24-25 cyber liability and data breach response coverage document.
We might want to think about is the consequences of not continuing.
So has the core, those, the limit of liability, all of those prices, have they changed? Or
I'm
is
not sure, Mrs. Ty, before that they have these stated limits based on each of these particular, like business interruption or cyber extortion or data recovery. I don't know that they had that in the core coverage and it's just core or core plus, but I wasn't here when we originally signed this, so I don't have anything to compare to.
This is going to be an ever-growing issue in our country. There's absolutely no way to not have some form of coverage. It's just in the papers all the time. News. Turn appraisal is huge problem. So we can be small compared to them, but a huge problem for us.
so, I mean, just staying with core, is that, do you think that's good enough? Because it's $1 million with core plus, and I don't know that we're at that limit, or are we?
That's a question really I think Mr. Loftus' expertise would come in handy for us, because for me, $250 to change the level of coverage or to double that in terms of the limit of liability might be worth the investment.
Yes, my question would be for our current provider, Falcon,
Fulcrum?
Fulcrum. Yes. Do you know, do they perform a test recovery on a regular basis? Because that's really the key. If they can recover and test at least quarterly, then we can be assured they're going to be able to recover to a certain point in time prior to the breach.
That I don't know, but we can certainly push this to the next meeting and we could have them here to ask those questions.
I think that's absolutely relevant to the situation. Because if they can prove to us that we can recover in a reasonable time, maybe we go with court. Have issues.
We have the.
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. Any further discussion?
Yes. To Michelle's question, I think down at the bottom, it says Tower 1, the limit for core, the limit of liability change from 1 million to 500,000. The limit for core plus from 2 million to 1 million.
So they've
They've
okay.
lowered their
Yeah.
coverage rates. I think, to Mr. Loftus's point, this continues to be an issue. And when cities don't do any basic defensive measures, I think, especially small cities, you are you've exposed yourself to quite a bit of risk. For instance, there were spam emails that came in this week that were supposedly from Mayor Crenshaw, not from any of his official accounts, but it looked realistic enough.
Yeah, I think the Vulcan group coming out to discuss what they can provide to you as a way of security would be very helpful.
And they may have alternative provider for cybersecurity.
We will get them either on this next agenda or the first one in August, depending upon our representative's availability.
However, even if they do, whatever you choose, you're looking at a difference of $250.
Well, yes, between the core and the core plus. Now, what we're paying now to what they are going to charge us is very different, yes.
But what we're getting now is the same as the core plus will be, essentially. I mean, because we were getting $1 million, now it's cut down to 500. Yeah, 500,000.
And I'd also like each of us to think in terms of what would happen. For instance, if we couldn't do utility billing for a month or two, or City Hall can't operate for a month. Think about the cost of that.
Well, just the internet going down leaves us with very little to tend to at that moment.
Well, I'm kind of leaning towards, do we even need Rhome? Because we for sure need this.
I'd like to see if they have an alternative provider.
Besides TML.
Yes.
I think Mr. Loftus is correct. The big one there is your data recovery. If your system completely crashes and you lose all your data, they wipe your hard drive, who's going to restore your back? Who handles your backup to restore everything? That's a big one.
Well, that's not necessarily my point. My point is we need the coverage. Do we just do it now instead of waiting? But if we can wait and no big deal.
We
then-
do have time to make a decision.
With that in mind,
No, sir, I just needed some
All right.
direction.
moving on. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of any necessary action regarding Priestley replant, legally described as acre GH Burdette Survey Lot 828, Lot 1, Block approximately 2.006 acres out of the original 17.271 acres in the GH Burdette Survey Abstract number 28. The property is in our ETJ, and the Planning and Zoning Commission has advised that we
Thank you, Mayor. This is an item that Mr. Priestley is here. If you all have any questions of him, this is a tract of property that his family purchased in the ETJ, and they are simply parceling off 2 acres. And the information is in your packet along about page 68 if you want to see a visual of the survey. This is something that we ministerially handle on behalf of the county as long as it meets the requirements and they provide the proper survey documents, which they have done. You may recall Mr. Priestley also came forward as our test case on the water well issue.
I feel like this is ministerial, like just good motions. I don't have anything to say.
no discussion for council. Let's do we have a motion?
It's a replat.
Yes, ma'am.
I make a motion to approve the replat.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Priestley? You are done.
All right, moving on. The appointment of a member to Parks and Recreation Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. I will take over that particular conversation. We do have an individual here this evening, I should say, that would like to potentially serve on Parks and Rec. Libby, how do you say your last name?
Sangali.
So her application is in your packet if you'd like to see that, and she was available to come speak to you this evening. So I'm going to turn the mic over to her.
I'm not really sure what to say.
Maybe just say a little bit about how long you've lived in Rome and what you're hoping to do by serving on the board.
I've been here a little over 2 years. I live right down the street by the farm. I've been here a long time. I just want to be involved. I haven't ever served in this capacity anywhere before, and I like that it's a small town and I know it's growing rapidly, and I just wanted to be involved.
We would like for you to be involved. That's something that I'd like to see Parks and Rec kind of come back to life. We'll need to find a couple more members to join you, but I'm hopeful that we will have some folks now that you've kind of been the first person to come forward. Maybe we'll get some additional folks because we do have a nice park that we'd like to be able to do some events in and plan things for the community. So I appreciate you being willing to be the first one into the water, so to speak.
I might know somebody to bring with me.
That'd be great.
That's great. Thank you so much for your interest in volunteering for the city.
No further questions from council?
Appreciate you.
Do I have a motion to accept her application?
I move that we accept the application. Libby Sangali. Parks and Recreation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda is the water tower used by the city of Boyd for emergency communication.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn this over to Chief Debus. He has some information for you, and we have discussed this in several different meetings before. So, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Gann. Thank you, Mayor and council members. I appreciate you having me out here to talk about this. If you read our local paper, the We Love Wise County Messenger, you've probably seen me talk about dispatch. We've talked about this in numerous meetings before this about moving to different systems and how that's going to work and what it's going to cost. The first movement, the first thing we need to do if we ever intend on going to another system is to establish the ability to use our radios in capacity here down in Southwest County. Our partners that we have a great relationship with now with the City of Boyd Police Department, their chief, Chief Jason Schmidt, is here tonight. If he has questions, you have questions that I can't answer. But basically, what this request is we need a repeater to go. So let me back up. Boyd has already entered an agreement with the City of Decatur to host their dispatch beginning October 1st. For that to happen, they need to put a repeater up either in their city or on the water tower here in Rome. What the water tower here in Rome provides is much wider coverage for both mobiles and handheld radios. It will provide a much better safety net for the officers that are on the street and allow them to communicate more adeptly with the dispatch center in Decatur. I did provide in your packet coverage maps that show mobile is rock solid. Portables, when you're out of your car, there's very few spots in our service area that would not be covered. How this affects us: one, it's allowing them access to our water tower, which several businesses already do. And this would allow us, in the event that we choose to move forward in a different direction, if we wanted to follow them to Decatur, that would allow us to just immediately piggyback off their repeater and use the same one for our service. So it would be forward thinking in the future that if we go with this and we allow them to do this, it allows us to move forward in the future if we choose to go that route. Now, I will say, as far as cost goes, the addition of a repeater on our tower is going to cost about $200,000. Boyd has agreed to completely cover that charge. So their city's going to step up with unused funds and pay the entire bill. So all we're asking, or all they're asking really, we're on their behalf, is to allow them to do that.
So these two maps that you have in here, one with the blue shades, is one with the repeater and one without? Is that
No,
what,
one is the one that is covered more in blue. Excuse me. That is if you're using your mobile radio in your car. The one that's a little spotty, that's your portable radio. The one I have here on this. That's when you get a distance away from your vehicle.
have we entered into an ILA with Decatur yet? Is that,
Not yet. That's one of the conversations that we will have here as a part of your budget discussion and a couple more agenda items.
I don't see that this is an issue. I think it's a good idea for sure.
Staff would recommend that we enter into this agreement with the City of Boyd. For one, it's the right thing to do. If we can be of assistance to help their officers be safer and obtain dispatch services, and it doesn't impact us negatively, then we should certainly step into that and be a good neighbor to the City of Boyd. If we make that decision to go with dispatch in Decatur, then they have graciously already put in the infrastructure, and for use of the tower, they are paying that bill. So this is really, to me, a very easy thing for me to recommend to council.
And for the record, if we choose to stay with the system that we're on and stay with the county, this should in no way impact that.
Council, have any further questions? Or do I hear a motion to allow or deny?
Make a motion to allow the City of Boyd to place a radio repeater on the Rhome water tower and authorize the city administrator to execute the agreement.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Carried.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Thank you to the city of Boyd.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, moving on, the next agenda item is the appointment of members for the bond committee. Mr. Loftus, I believe that is agenda item.
Does anyone have any applications?
The city hall did not receive any.
I have one man I asked. Yes, you have to read to.
Is anybody in the audience that are they interested in the bond committee?
I don't see any show of hands at this time.
I also have one person who I have reached out to. She's expressed interest in.
Just remember, until we get enough people that want to do this and fill it out, we do have coverage over our bond. We have oversight of how our spent. So citizens will know we have a lot of oversight too.
Yeah, the purpose of this is to build trust in the community. Because in the past, there has been questions about how this is funded. So that's the entire purpose.
Excuse me, do we have council direction? Do you want me to leave this open for 30 days and see if anyone applies? And then if not, I mean, the bylaws have been approved, and if people come forward, that's certainly one thing, but we're still struggling to fill P&Z and some of our other boards, so I don't know if you all make that personal reach out, you might have some success, but at current, I don't have anybody waiting in the wings.
Is there something that we can forward from the city that says, hey, we're looking for somebody to fill P&Z, Park and Recs, we're trying to fill these things, and that way we can get them to the other pages, but it's from the city, not necessarily.
We do that. We do that for P&Z. We do that for Parks and Rec. It's been on the city's website and on social media. I can certainly do it again. That's not an issue at all.
For the bond committee
I
specifically?
have not mentioned that one. I did Parks and Rec for sure, and P&Z has been mentioned, but we can certainly put that out there as kind of a holistic, here's ways you can serve.
Yeah, because I think there are people that have questions on are there any restrictions to who can be on the bond committee? They don't know necessarily if there are rules.
We can put something together. So I don't really have a good way to send it to by official mail, but we can certainly put it on the website and we can put it on social media. And we don't have email abilities as of yet. Now, I've got some folks that have signed up electronically for the newsletter, but there's only about 3 to 5 of those.
It's just something that maybe we can push out, or have somebody that's actively on the city's website that can push that stuff out to you.
We can work on it.
In the future, we're working to get someone that can do PR and information management within the office. That's one of our goals, and that's their whole job will be informing the public about what's going on. Things like that, but right now, all they can do is put it out on Facebook and the city's website. I think that's the best they can do.
I think that's what I was asking, just so that we can push it out.
We've had good success with people sharing that information to the ancillary sites that people in Rome frequent, which is very helpful. I just need to be a little more direct, I guess, or explanatory about what all is entailed, because I do think sometimes they look at council and they think that's a lot of work, and twice a month, etc. If we can provide some parameters under which they may serve on those boards, maybe that will help some folks gain an understanding.
We have in the city, we have a problem with our culture of politics. And we really need to promote that. And this is an instance. I'm personally a little disappointed that we haven't had some folks who have commented on the way the city spends on that. Their participation. So, just hopefully we'll see.
Maybe once we put it out there and they understand kind of what all is required, we might see some favorable responses.
further discussion. Let's move on to the next item, preliminary budget discussion for FY 24-25.
Thank you, Mayor. You will find in front of you, council, and those who are here in person in the audience, there is a copy of the PowerPoint presentation in the back. If you would like to have a copy of that, if you'll bear with me, I'll try and pull this up so that we can share this so that folks at home can see as well. If I do this correctly. Okay, so I think the only way to get it to advance is to show it in a PDF. If someone is at home watching this and can text an audience member or council member if it's not advancing, that would be great because I don't have the ability to monitor that from here. So moving into your budget conversation, you all will recall that we've had at least one workshop on the budget. We briefly talked about it in light of council orientation, just from a very, very high level. So I'm going to walk you through this information the same as what we had last. It's the same format on your budget presentation as last year. We have a lot of basics still yet to cover in the city of Rome, and we might as well stay consistent so that as we are gathering data over the years, back to a conversation that I recently had with Mayor Crenshaw about setting goals and objectives for the city, this data that we're gathering will serve as some baselines for our judging our success in the future. And so if we can keep it as consistent as possible amongst the budget and keep those numbers where people clearly understand and know where to go look for them each year, that just makes everyone's life a little bit easier. So I apologize that this is the same presentation recycled, but I think it does help everyone. So moving to slide number 2, you will see that I have listed here your certified values for the last 3 years. We have grown our tax base in valuation, but not complexity, significantly in the last several years. You will see that from FY 21-22, we had about $183 million in valuation, and the information that I've received that's preliminary thus far from the county for FY 24-25 is right at $255 million. What you will also notice is in the third column for 23-24 to 24-25, there's been a reduction. Some of that comes if there's been a change in mineral valuation. We have noticed, Brooke and I looked at that. She brought that to my attention when we were going through getting ready for tonight. I will also say hold the $255 million for year 24-25 loosely, because as they finally certify the value and get us the final numbers, that number in the past has often gone up. So we may see a change in that number as well. Over the past 4 years, when you calculate this out, it's about a 40% increase in our tax base in and of itself. So as your valuation, you'll recall from some of our previous conversations, as your valuation continues to go up, your tax rate continues to go down. Does that make sense? As your valuation expands, the individual tax rate on the homes will continue to go down. It's not meant, when you adopt the no new revenue rate, which we've talked about before each year, it is meant to generate the same amount of income for maintenance and operations as the year before. And as we get into some of the slides as we go along, you will see that the bulk of our funding for operations does not come from property tax. We're receiving relatively small amounts considering the budget needs of the community. So just hold that loosely as we go through this discussion. So then looking at the certified values here, on the tax base in a different graph form, you can just see it's been pretty much an upward trajectory from 2014, which is about the last 10 years coming forward. Now, when you juxtapose that and you look at the tax rate, you'll recall that I was saying to you that as your value goes up, your tax rate goes down if you are going to continue with the no new revenue rate. One of the things that council made the decision to do last year in the fiscal year was to hold the tax rate steady at the 437,815. We had earmarked that money at about $270,000 strictly for street repairs, which is one of the things that we heard in our citizen survey that people valued and they wanted to have done. As a result of the rollback petition that was submitted and the subsequent vote that was successful in May, you may recall that I've sent you all an email this week saying that those checks for refunds have gone out to residents, and that is business owners, that's people who live in the various homes, if they were eligible for a refund, those checks have been mailed from the county. Blessedly, that's something that the county handles as part of our contract with them because we do not have the staff capacity or the information that we would need to calculate that and send it out. So Mrs. Vaughn from Wise County Tax Office has been a tremendous assistance to us in that particular realm. When I did ask them about the average check, when you look at how much was actually paid out and the number of checks that were cut, it was about $348 for the year. One thing I think residents need to be mindful of is it's not just on your home that's paying for taxes. She did tell us that the business checks were between $1,000 and $4,000. So that's an area where coming at our tax rate or looking at it through the lens of always letting it go on a downward trajectory, at that rate, we're not going to have the funds we need to provide the basic operations of the city.
And just to be clear, those funds were earmarked for street repairs. So
Yes.
we no longer have those funds for the street repairs.
Correct.
Those funds are being refunded. Choice.
Yes. We had to cut a check for just under, well, right at $270,000 that we sent to the county. So just also giving you a visual here as the tax rate. From what I have seen since 1993, the tax rate's been as high as 64 cents. And today we're at 34 cents. Okay? You can also look at the tax rate history just in the past 5 years. You will see that in 1819 it was set at about 48 cents, which is what I'm talking about. Cities like Boyd and Northlake and Westlake and some other cities that I know of, they try and keep that tax rate fairly steady. Because as long as you keep that in a steady manner as your tax base grows, you will gain additional funds from adding those new properties on your roll from which to fund your operations. Or debt if necessary. You may not even need to issue debt through that lens if you have enough revenue coming in. But with the advent of what happened for this current fiscal year, we lowered that tax rate by 10 cents. So that was a significant impact for our budget. Then when you look at it just from a tax rate comparison, you'll recall that we have put together a list of benchmark cities from which to look at and gauge our success through a variety of lenses. You will see that Boyd, Bridgeport, and Decatur are closer to about the 60-cent mark. Boyd is actually one of the cities that holds their tax rate the same, and it's been at 66 cents for many years. And that includes not only their operations, but also their debt rate. You will see that Rhome at 34 cents, we're closer to the tax range of Roanoke, Hazlitt, and Northlake. Northlake, and you'll see Boyd and Northlake are starred for a reason. They are two cities that keep their tax rate at the same level every year. We certainly do not have the tax-based diversification that the last three cities have. And so it is a bit of a challenge, and we'll talk about that as we go through the rest of the budget on how we fund the things that the community has stated they'd like to see. So then looking at this slide, this gives even a more informative look at the current tax rate and how it's broken out. And I know completely this is a complex conversation. It is difficult for those of us in the municipal world who work in this all day, every day. There's a lot of belief that the taxes that are paid each year on your home, that folks generally believe that all stays within Rome. So one of the calculations that we're going to do as we go through this budget process is determining out of each dollar spent on an average tax bill, how much of it is retained by the city and how much of it is sent out to the county, to the school district, to water districts, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we'll be surprised just how little of that stays within our city, which is for the direct benefit of the residents of Rome. So you will see again, here's Boyd, Bridgeport, Decatur, Justin, and there is Rome at 21 cents. The green column is what we have out of our ad valorem tax rate from which to fund operations. For maintenance of vehicles, for improvements in streets, to some extent, and you will see that we are almost half every one of those cities. You will also see that our debt rate dropped to 12 cents for this year because we have paid off some debt. We will pay off some additional debt this year. We will also issue debt this year. The city was the residents were very generous in supportive of the bond package that we needed to fix the infrastructure, and that's going to make a tremendous difference to our community. I've had people in again this week wanting to know where we are and how this is going to play out because they're looking to bring additional retail and or restaurant business, not necessarily sit-down restaurant, we haven't gotten that far yet, but different types of fast food options for folks along the 114 corridor. That's the exact kind of diversification of that tax base we need to capture not only the property tax, but the sales and use tax, which helps take the burden off the residents that currently live here. So just trying to give a little more dimension to how tax dollars are used. And if you pay an $8,000 tax bill, that doesn't stay in Rome. The bulk of that is exported out to other entities that might provide school systems or county services, but it doesn't stay within your city government. Any questions on that side? So I briefly want to talk about your fund types on this particular slide here. You know, we've talked about general fund, which generally pays out administration, building and development, court, and police. The fire department fund and the Parks and Rec fund, they have their own particular accounts, and we maintain that separately. We balance that down separately. We also have a court security fund, and we have a court technology fund. There's also a hotel motel tax fund, which we receive about $18,000 a year from Motel 6 based on taxes paid at that establishment, and it can only be used for certain type of expenditures, as we have discussed. We have the Rome Beautification Fund, which has, I believe, about $1,200 in it. We currently have a limited number of folks who contribute to that fund, but we do keep it separate and maintain all of the revenue and expenditures for that in a separate area. Same thing for grants funds. One of the things that I did when we came in and we started to revamp the budget last year was I asked our consultants to separate out our grant and our debt from our general budget line items, because you really need to track those separately so that you have a clear understanding how grant money is being used and how debt is being paid, both principal and interest. So we've managed to work that through, and so we're in a much better position. Then we have the utility fund, which is an enterprise-based fund. At your next meeting, it's our intention to have the individuals from the Texas Rural Water Association on hand to give you an overview of the latest rate study that we've had done for the utility fund and provide you with some information as to what we may or may not want to consider in funding utilities. So it's often referred to as water and sewer, but most generally known as the utility fund on the budget side. I always like to provide budget assumptions to council, just looking forward for how we built the base budget. I find it very helpful for councils who are looking at this and trying to make those hard decisions as to where we increase service delivery, or if we hire additional personnel, or if we fix a particular area in the city that needs to be tended to. If you start with the base budget. So the base budget is generally meant to fund the exact same services last year as the next year. There may be some cost escalations either based on trended data or based on legislative mandates from the state or the federal government, depending upon what has come our direction that we really don't have a choice but to implement. So you'll see that in your base budget, because that's the only way we can continue to do operations. And I'll go through some of that with you as we get further along. The property tax information will be provided to us by the county. I do have access to software that we will check all of that, and I can provide you with information when it comes to setting the tax rate as to what the no new revenue rate may generate, what the voter approval rate will generate, what the de minimis rate, all of those things we'll get into over the next couple of meetings. There is no use of fund balance currently projected in the base budget. We have not gotten that far in the process. We are still working on updating fund balance with our pre-audit team from last fiscal year to this, so I'm hopeful to have that very soon. And I have not included any capital improvements, infrastructure, or major projects in the base budget. Does that make sense? Okay, so then we're going to jump into fund overview. So looking at your general fund, which is considered your main checking account, we generated or expected to generate last fiscal year about $3.26 million. We are on track to exceed that slightly as of now. We are working to get our sales and use tax information updated. It seems like that will be higher than what we budgeted for, which is always great news. When you have sales tax that is coming into your budget, you're basically importing money into your city. You're not placing the bulk of that burden on the residents because people who pass through Rome, who do business in Rome, they are generally paying some of those taxes as well, where property tax is really those who live in the city limits, business or residential. So when we see the sales and use tax numbers go up, that's really great. There is a downside to that because sales and use tax fluctuates with the economy. When the economy drops, you can see significant changes in your sales and use tax money. And when that happens, if we have not allocated enough in reserves, you'll recall when we talked about setting our fund balance days at 120, that gives us 4 months of reserves, which is much better. It gives, so in that instance, if the economy has a significant downturn, as the city manager, we will shut off all spending until we know what's going to happen that's not personnel related or critical to operations. And we will postpone any project and bring that back to council for review at some point. So those measures coupled with your reserves is meant to get you through the ups and downs of sales use terms in your budget. But we need to make sure that the ad valorem side of the ledger is also significant enough or substantial enough or funded well enough that we can still provide for basic services to some extent. So when you look here, as a part of your property tax revenue, which is part of the monies, the 3.266 that you saw in general fund, a subset of that is your property tax. You will see that in FY 23-24, we predicted that at about $800,000. That includes operations and debt. When you look at that through the lens of just operations, it's less than $500,000. So this is one of the slides that we looked at during your budget retreat, which I think was a little informative for council to see, because when you look up in the left-hand corner and you see the subset of the chart that I have listed there, you can see that your operations are in blue, your debt is in red, and then the tax rate itself, or the total tax rate, the tax rate is trending down. There's been no appreciable movement in operational costs in many, many years. We have kept that very level. Not a bad thing. But as Rome continues to have more and more cars go through here each day, as we continue to have businesses that want to relocate, as we have more taps on the water, more homes come in, there has been growth. We can't continue to maintain operations at a flat rate in perpetuity. It just, you will run out of enough staff members to provide those services. Any questions on that before we jump into some of the line items? Okay, so getting into the meat of the conversation, I took a little different approach to provide you some of the line item numbers rather than the rolled up numbers so that you could see kind of what we were looking at and thinking in the base budget. You will see that property tax INS debt service is shown as yellow because I do not have the updated information from our financial advisors as of yet. This may change based on when we issue debt in this coming fiscal year versus next fiscal year. So we will hold that steady until we have new information from our financial advisor. You will see that under miscellaneous revenue, I have adjusted that up $5,000 for this year, and that is based on historical trending that I have noticed in this line item for the past several years, and we shouldn't have any issues hitting that number. One thing I do not like to do in budgets is overpromise and underdeliver, so I'm always more cautious than some people may like, but I find that to be a much better approach when the municipality is small. So when we move into the section of expenditures for the administration area, you will see that there are some slight adjustments on this to both the overtime number, the education and training number, because we have underfunded that for several years. You will see a reduction in telephone and internet, and you will see it moved for the most part to technology because it is costing more for technology each year, and the telephone and the internet is holding steady. So we can adjust that and offset it in the line item shown below. You will also see in the last column there's a difference of the percentage of change from the base budget to the adopted budget from last year, which gives you some indication how that line item has changed. Then at the end of each department, I will tell you how each department's numbers have changed. So moving on to the next page as it relates to administration and any changes, you will see that the contract labor is shown as an increase of 30,000, as well as accounting service of 16,500. We have been unsuccessful in hiring an accountant type person or an accountant specialist type person. So if we continue with the current configuration at City Hall with the new admin assistant who's doing a wonderful job and the new city secretary who has also jumped in with both feet, I think we can contract with the folks that we're currently using, and it will cost us less than the specialist we had predicted for salary and benefits. So I think this is a more economical way to go. Well, we want to make sure we have those experts that can provide us, because the last thing we ever want to do is have any issues with our finances. I want that to be as open to the residents as possible and to you, because this is the public money. This is not our money. And so that's how we approach that.
Scenario.
Yes. Yeah. When you look down at the last under building maintenance, I did increase that $400. Anything anymore that requires a plumber to come out or any major repair, even though it's a leased building, we exceed the $1,600 fairly quickly. So I did show that increasing slightly. We may not use it all, but just in case, it would be budgeted based on previous trending. Any questions on that slide? So moving on to the last slide of general administration, you see there are no changes on this slide per se. You will see again the bond interest expense and the bond principal is held steady because I need to get the new numbers from the financial advisor, and we don't have those as of just yet. Now, if you will go down to the total expenditure line, you will see that that's a change of about $50,000 for that administrative budget, which equates to a 3% increase overall. Does that make sense? Any questions on administration? Now, just one thing I wanted to remind council is none of these numbers contemplate any staff salary changes, benefits changes, or additional personnel. This is simply the base budget, keeping the same folks at the same level that we have right now. Any decisions that you make or direction you provide in your next iteration of the budget, I will bring those new numbers to you. Okay? Mrs. King, did you have a question? Okay. So moving on to another department that is generally considered under the administrative wing is the municipal courts. And I have kept that flat this year, as court does generate revenue, but it is not meant to be a revenue generating department, if that makes sense. It is meant to administer the citations that are filed within its jurisdiction. We have struggled in the past couple of years to hit the revenue mark in this department, so I believe if we hold it flat, we will be better off. You will see that there is an increase in office supplies on this particular line item that would be requested. That's just based on the need and the number of cases that we're processing. And then you will see that there is an increase in legal fees for the prosecutor. And Mrs. Adams does her very best to keep those costs low. She and I discuss that routinely, and the frustration with what it amounts to when we have to call the prosecutor in, because it's an expensive line item. However, that is all driven by the request of a defendant, and they have that right. So as part of running a municipal court, this is a cost of business. So rather than underfund it, I would prefer to submit to council something that would more likely come in on budget as it's supposed to, so that's why you see that line item change. All in all, that's a 1% increase for this department. Any questions here? Okay, so looking then at development for general fund, and I apologize, this is a little small on the screen. I tried to get everything on one slide. In this particular area, this is where we account for the permits and site plans and plats and other fees associated with development. Excuse me, currently the bulk of that revenue is generated from the new homes that are being built on the RVR ranch. As they continue to build those out, at some point in this budget, we are going to have to adjust this number from 100,000, because at some point they will reach max capacity, but that's going to be several years down the road. You will also see that I kept most everything flat in this area except for animal registration. We don't have a lot of folks who register their animals. So rather than provide a number that's not going to be ever reached, it's more appropriate for me to provide something that is realistic. And I think if we got $50 in revenue off that, we'd be doing good. Then if you look down on the bottom of that, you will see that I also increased the amount of money that we are going to pay to the county for animal pickups because that is what we seem to be trending. And it just is a cost of business for the community. Now, I think it goes back to some of Chief's arguments that we're already paying taxes to the county. Why are we paying for animal control? But that's a fight to have another day. So just keep that in mind. So then moving into the police line items, if you will, you will see that I have held revenue flat in this particular area as well. One of the things that I am very pleased with in this budget that we had not quite evolved to when I first came in was we didn't have a line item allocated for the RBR PMB revenue that funds the officer, and we did not have a line item allocated for the Aurora contract revenue that we received. So we do have that now in our last year's budget and then coming forward for this year. You will see that the Aurora contract is in yellow because we do not have a negotiated agreement for the next fiscal year. We received a letter from Aurora that they have gone out to bid for police and potentially code enforcement, and that's something that we'll want to talk about. Mayor, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify for people that may or may not know what RBR PMB is. That's Roll and D. They pay for the services that they get.
Thank you, sir. I try not to use those acronyms, but sometimes it won't fit on the line, so that is correct. They pay for one full police officer as well as benefits and any uniforms, training, etc. that goes along with that officer's position. And then they also pay for one full-time firefighter. And you'll see that in the fire. Any questions on this particular revenue slide? Okay. So moving on to some of the expenditures for police, we have some areas in this department that have been historically underfunded in the past. So I'm asking council to consider increasing the education and training by $8,000 to send. We have a fairly large number of staff members there that were sharing $4,000, and that does not equate to anything that is remotely comprehensive for the staff. So if we move that to $12,000, I think we'll have a better chance to send our staff members to vital training that will be of use to the city. You will see that the office supplies increased slightly. You will see that the uniform and clothing allowance also increased slightly. Things are they cost more than they have in the past. And then the technology line item, just to replace one computer, is about $2,300. So I increased that by $1,000. Then moving to the next expenditure slide for the police department, you will see that vehicle repairs and maintenance is double. We have a very nice number of rolling stock units, police officer cars, both brand new and some that we have kept and retained that are still serviceable, but they all need tires. And tires are expensive, and we put a lot of miles on cars every year driving the community. So we are often over budget in this line item. It's, to me, a more appropriate way in budgeting to reflect the numbers that you intend to use and then budget for what you need, not to show it lower and then come in higher and say, oh, I'm sorry. That's not really the way I would like to go about that. Gas and oil is also increased by $2,000 just because of the general cost, and equipment is doubled to $8,000 from $4,000. You will also see towards the bottom that I moved building maintenance from $1,000 to $5,000. $1,000 in building maintenance for any of these has never been sufficient, and it has really put staff in a hard position to make some decisions that we don't have time to necessarily bring back to council. For instance, the air conditioning unit went out at the police station this year. They wear a plethora of clothes and body armor, etc. They wear a lot of stuff around their waist, and they can't be expected to go in and out of that building without any air conditioning. So Chief and I made a decision to take that out of the Aurora money because we have a line item for that, but just that alone was $8,000. So if we move the total budget for building costs, because we own these buildings, to $5,000, I think we're going to come closer to staying within budget potentially, and we might even have some money in case something comes up that we didn't expect. You will see that I changed that as well for Public Works and for Fire because they all had $1,000. I did not change that at City Hall because we don't own that building. So if major events occur with City Hall, we would, to the terms of our lease agreement, be able to look to the owner of the building, so we don't need to budget that much for that facility. Okay. Then looking at the final slide for police, you will see that utilities and water, just based on general usage, I increased $50 because that seems to be what we are expending. In one of these line items, Chief and I discussed that we increased some of it just due to the cost of ammo for them to do training. So the education and training also would provide them some ammunition so that when they need to stay current and qualify, they are not paying that out of their own pocket. Okay. So here is the fire fund, and you will see that I have reduced the projected revenues on fire by about $18,500. The donations have historically been budgeted at $5,000. Sometimes it comes in, sometimes it doesn't. And I would rather be surprised with the donation than have over budgeted something and then find that we're not going to have that revenue, but yet we've relied on it. You will also see that the fundraisers have been eliminated. One of the things that I've spoken to Chief Estes about is they are not going to do fill the boot out on the street any longer. It has become far too dangerous with the amount of traffic that has come through here. It is not worth the risk of a staff member becoming injured, and just certainly with the traffic rerouting, it's just the amount of money, and we appreciate every bit that people donate to the fire department. They're going to try and find some other ways if folks want to donate on behalf of than to do the fill the boot, because they're weaving in between traffic, and we've got a lot of semis, and we've got a lot of people that are trying to get home to Boyd or other areas, and that's just become an untenable situation for them. The Tarrant County contract went up by $500, so I showed that increase in revenue there. And then cost recovery is some of the billing when we have accidents within Rhome that we may be able to receive some reimbursement from. Thus far, they have underperformed, and so I have shown that revenue decreased in half because we don't want to rely on something we're not going to get. Any questions on the fire department?
And are we paying for that cost recovery? Okay.
And you will see overall that the revenue for the fire fund or the fire department has been reduced by about 3%. So then moving to expenditures for the fire department, you will see there are two at the bottom of this particular slide that have changed. One on station supplies. We now have more folks on staff. We have one for every shift, and so that has changed, and we need to adjust that number. And then the banquet service awards has been kept at $1,000 for many, many years, and just getting food and honoring those people each year, just the general costs have gone up. So a $500 increase would really help them to celebrate those folks that volunteer with us and that work with us in a very difficult line. I mean, that's a very minimal amount of money. Moving to the next slide for fire expenditures, you will see that gas and oil has gone up by $3,000. That's just general cost of doing business. We also have more rolling stock. We have one brand new brush truck. We have another one that the current brush truck was funded through either grants or the sale of previous equipment. And we have another brush truck that's about to be negotiated that's also going to come in through grants. So we've been fortunate to have those, but once you put them on the road, they require fuel. And so we have adjusted that based on those numbers. At the very bottom of this spreadsheet, or this slide, you will see the $4,000 increase for building maintenance just for the fire department. Then when you look at the fire fund itself in the next slide and the total increase request just for the base budget, it's 1.2% versus the previous fiscal year. So that's also a minimal move in that particular direction. Any question on fire? So then moving to Parks and Rec, and Mrs. Singali, this might interest you. We currently transfer $18,000 out of general fund into the Parks Fund for a variety of things. Now, the numbers that we show here do not anticipate any projects or any improvements. We are very hopeful that with the resurrection of a Parks Board, we might be able to apply for some different grants. One of the things that I had Mr. Dominguez price for me this fiscal year was shade. sails that could go over the playground equipment. So if the children wanted to play, it's not 7,000 degrees on the equipment. Those were really expensive, and I wasn't aware that was $165,000 for those. So we had to put a pause on that particular discussion. But if we could apply for some grants, that would be wonderful. But the $18,000 basically covers any contract labor that we need to repair something, the family park upkeep, Veterans Park to some extent, general maintenance by our public works staff because they mow and take care of the flower beds there, and then just the general gas and electric and water because we do, when we have it, we do water, especially the Veterans Park and other areas. And so it's just basically a status quo from last year. Any questions on any of that? That's all of your general fund, parks, and fire overview on the budget for the base numbers. Okay, now to the fun stuff. Utility fund. You will see in utility fund that I have not changed any revenue predictions from this fiscal year to the next. We have not had any appreciable increase in the amount of water that we're receiving from Walnut Creek. We do not have our current wells or the new wells that the bonds are going to allow for online. So I don't have additional water necessarily to sell at this point. So until we see some additional sales and or reduction in production costs, if we are able to generate several hundred gallons a minute from our own production, then I really can't change these numbers at this juncture. We might see a little move above what I have shown, but it's going to be fairly consistent at about $1.5 million in general revenue. When I said to you that we'll have the TRWA folks out next meeting on the 25th, they were at least one. They were at one of our town halls for sure, and they also came back and they talked to Mr. Dominguez and I about their review of our rate structure, both for water and sewer, and some of their analysis, and they will have a lot of information for you that will be very good. It's a little difficult. I'm not a water person. I'm not in it all the time, so it gets a little rough for me to figure out all the ins and outs, but they're very good at explaining that. So I hope you're all here at the next meeting to listen to that information as well. So for utility fund, we don't show any appreciable increase in revenue at this point. You will see on this slide that there is a slight reduction in telephone and internet just because that's the general cost that it is being charged to us, so I lowered that by $500. But here is where we have to make some changes in costs, or we're going to have to figure out some cuts in other areas. So equipment repair and maintenance, we are required to purchase generators for several of our sites. Those are going to require annual maintenance, so I have included that by raising this line item by $5,500. Equipment rentals, we are going to want to start renting crack seal equipment to try and protect our roads. To purchase that, Mr. Dominguez has done some research that does not make sense for us financially, but we can rent one of those and then purchase the ancillary material once or twice a year. And if we do that, we can extend the life of the roads. Mr. Johnson can probably speak to this a lot better than I can. But to purchase one of those machines is pretty expensive, and if we can rent one, that would be, I think, at this time, a better use of funds. Then looking at gas and oil, again, it's just the general cost increase. I've raised that by $3,500. Water, sewer, shop supplies. This might be some funds that we could put towards putting some inventory in Public Works. We've talked about that at the budget retreat about having to locate stuff in the middle of the night or travel a county or two away to find the material they need. We might be able to use some of this, but we'll have to see. Then building maintenance, you will see I changed that $4,000 because we also own that building. Now the utilities on gas and electric, we pay the electric on all the street lights around town, so that is a cost escalation. Those are things that do cost the city money. So in order to be consistent with what we seem to be paying, I adjusted that by $10,000. Then looking at the bond interest expense, as we pay some of the bonds out of the utility fund, the interest goes down. So you'll see I showed that at $5,300 less, but the principal is going up, so it's a wash because we're going to be paying more in principal and less in interest. So it's basically, you see a negative 6% and then a positive 6%. So that's not really going to move our needle too much. Then you will see on sewer testing, just in general, that has gone up. So on that slide 35, that's an increase of $5,000, which is a total increase in that budget of $26,625 or 2%. Now, if you will go back to slide number 31 that I gave you in your slide deck, and if you will look at the base numbers for 24-25 as it relates to revenue at 1.519 million, and we lay that aside the base numbers for expenditures of 1.549 million, we have a deficiency in this particular department for sure. And that is before we make any changes in payroll or if council makes any decision to offer additional staff in this area, which we could use. So I want to be very clear with you that this is a fund that I have mentioned to you multiple times has struggled for years. And we've talked about how and when and why. But I want to make sure that you're aware that this does contemplate some use of fund balance just at the base budget level. Okay? So then, looking ahead at some of the CIP numbers or the things that we are working on currently, you know we're working through the lead and copper mandate. That was from, and basically doesn't come with a lot of funding, but it comes with a lot of work. So we are moving through that. We still need to talk about rehabbing or replacing the ground storage water tanks. None of those numbers are included in your base budget. And the secondary water source, that's the ongoing long-term view. So that's a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 year look. But we want to make sure we're keeping it in front of us because it's a necessity. On general fund, the replacement of the West wastewater treatment plant is in process. We met with the engineers this week and we finalized the directions that they needed in order to create the engineering documents. Once we have that done, we will notify our financial advisors. It takes about 6 weeks for them to get everything together, to get it to council, and then they can sell the bonds within 3 weeks after that. So it's a 9-week total process with the FA or your financial advisor to get the bonds put out to market and sold and all through the steps that requires. But we don't want to do any of that until we have accurate numbers, because you'll recall the bond amounts that were set is a maximum amount and we may not need to issue all that. So if we don't want to issue 11.5 for the plant and find out we only needed 8. So until we get the engineering specs finished, then I can't move that forward any faster than we're doing. So that's kind of where we are in that process. Same thing for the replacement of the clay tile water lines. Mr. Dominguez sat down with them earlier this week and went over the map, and they drew out what would be included in the west plant and what we needed to replace, so they have a clear understanding of what they need to engineer and what areas of Old Town for that. You may not recall, but I'm going to bring this up. We have about $360,000 or $70,000 in an investment account left over from the bonds from the 2019 sale for the east plant that will be also used for clay tile replacement, but we've had to identify sections that will flow to the east plant, and he will engineer those at the same time so we can mobilize for both. We can use that bond money that's already been sitting there in that investment account to pay for those improvements on that side, and then the west plant, what was recently approved by the voters, will be for that side. However, if we mobilize one company all at the same time, we can get some economies of scale. So I think that's going to work very well for us. Does that make sense? Then we talked about and identified a couple of areas for the water wells. One of them would be at the elevated tank, and if Mr. Dominguez is here, if you have some questions, but we've talked about drilling a well at the elevated tank since it's close to the source. We don't have to put in a lot of infrastructure. The other is to drill at well 5, which is back over here behind us off Hickory area, Pecan and Hickory. We have some land there that would make it easy for us to drill. We can tie into some of the infrastructure that currently exists, and hopefully that well is currently in the Paluxy. We're hopeful to go down to the Trinity and gain some additional flow. And then if we have enough funds, the third location would be at the site on FM 3433. Okay. So as we move through that, we'll kind of do the costing and see what we're going to get and find out how much we can potentially get out of each of those bonds. And we will continue to update council and the community as we go along in this process, because I know that they entrusted us, and I know that they invested in Rome and they voted such, and I want to make sure that they are getting the information so they know where we're at in the process. One of the other things that we're going to have to talk about in CIP at some point are facilities in general. Not today. We're not prepared to make a long-term decision on that today, but we will have to look at it because we still have issues in those areas. The senior center and what we're going to do with those ARPA funds that we've had conflicting information. Do we repair it? Do we not? We'll need to revisit that as a council. There's also street repairs. As the mayor mentioned, we did try to plan for some of that, but with the rollback, we've had to refund that money, so we'll have to look at how else we might be able to come at that. And at some point, there may be some apparatus replacement for the fire and EMS department, but we're not there yet. Okay. So then, yes, sir, it will. But that can also be packaged together as a benefit to the community, and I'm hopeful that people will see it that way when we get to that section. So what I heard from council and from the mayor in conversations that I have with him each week is kind of some prioritization of what we might look at in any expansion in the budget, so service delivery needs expansion. I looked at payroll adjustments for current staff. We do have a document, and I don't know what mine is, but you all have it, that says pay scale analysis 24-25. And I did go through and look at our pay scales that the council approved last year and allocated or calculated increases, if you will, for both general fund and utility funds. And I have listed the impact of just a change in base pay. This does not include the benefits numbers, so I will need to continue to firm that up. But if we made the payroll adjustments that you see on this, there's changes from 6%, up to 10%, depending upon where the position was in the pay scale. We have one in general fund that actually, if council makes the recommended change, would actually get them to within 3% of the midpoint. All the rest are still below that number, and you will recall that we discussed this as a multi-year approach. We do not have the funding to do this all at once. And so if we can make these changes, this will bring current staff closer to market, and it will still give us the ability to consider our moves in future years. If you look on the back of that piece of paper, you will see that I have information for utility funds, and those are anywhere from a 6 to a 10% increase based on the pay scale. And you will see at the bottom there are two positions that we have approved, but they're not funded. One of them is that senior finance specialist position. We did not have anyone apply, so we can use consultants for that. And then the code enforcement officer, which is something that we'll want to talk about as we continue down this path, because we do potentially have an opportunity to partner with the city of Aurora, who is interested in maybe helping to fund a position and share it with us for code enforcement. So back to your slide deck, the $75,000 that you see listed there, that is the cumulative change in base pay for the positions that you see on your sheet that you have separate and apart. The funding for dispatch services that Chief Davis talked about are $45,000 for our costs to the city of Decatur. To me, that is an excellent investment in the safety and coverage for our officers. And with Boyd paying the cost of the infrastructure, it would be wonderful if we could come to some decision so that we could pursue an ILA with Decatur if that's council's direction. The computer-aided dispatch and records management system for police is about $110,000. That is also something that is critical to their safety and welfare out in the field. The fact that in today's day and age they're having to call in on cell phone because they don't have access to the technology that they need makes me very nervous. It makes me very concerned that we're going to have something happen to one of our staff members. The other requests that have come in that I think are equally important that we have got to look at is the hiring of additional firefighter personnel. Even if we fill and have one more person on each shift, unfortunately that's 3 people. and that's about $180,000. If we hire 2 patrol officers for a motor unit, that's about $140,000 base pay, and keep in mind that there is an offset, good or bad, however people look at it, there's an offset based on the revenue that they generate because those officers are simply for traffic enforcement, and they would write citations that would then be filed in the municipal court.
Does that include their motorcycles?
No, ma'am. Now, I do know that we can lease those rather than buy them outright, which would be far less expensive, but that is something we have to keep in mind. Chief Debus has also talked about the hiring of another sergeant as the community needs continue to expand. That's an important oversight position that we need. We currently go stretches of on-duty time without a sergeant because we have 2 in that area. We don't have overlapping coverage. Our vendor for technology, Fulcrum, has recommended about $30,000 worth of improvements to our system. I'm not certain that all those have to be done this year, but it's something that we could explore. And then the cost of sharing a code enforcement officer, which we could keep busy. We have several areas in this town that could benefit from some code enforcement guidance. But I estimate that at about $60,000. And this is a position from fire, police, and code enforcement. Those are the ones I hear the most about from our residents. So for general fund, this would be the change. You see that the cumulative total of that is about $715,000. I can tell you we don't have the funding for that. So we're going to have to prioritize what we can and hopefully create a path forward. But this is, and I want to be as clear with our community and with council as possible, these are basic needs that don't even address the situation we need just for fire coverage. So one of the things that we talked about at our budget retreat was what we're doing with that half-cent property tax offset that is currently being used out of our sales and use tax money, that if it was re-voted by our residents into a crime control district, we could allocate that towards police. And we could lower the impact to general fund, which would give us capacity for some of these other public safety items that we need if we were letting the sales and use tax fund a portion of our police costs. And that's something that we received direction from you all at the retreat to pursue, letting the voters have their voice on that, and we'll definitely need to educate why that's important. But we cannot continue to provide any services at 33 cents or 34 cents for operations. We don't have the capacity. It's not there. And I know people have complained about the salary levels for staff, but I can't cut enough salary levels for staff to move a needle enough to get us at $750,000. And even at this number, it doesn't fully fund fire, where we have 3 people on every shift, which is bare minimum for a fire department. So I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but if I don't present the entire picture to the community and to you all can't make the decisions we need to have made. So if I had to rank these, I would think the first 3 are critical, but that's something that council will want to take into consideration. I do think that there may be some one-time money that we could use for at least the first year of funding dispatch and for the RMS and CAD system. So that would take those numbers out of the equation, but we still don't have enough in reserve or generated in revenue to pay for these service delivery need expansions that the community needs and has asked for. Yes,
Just real quick, is council aware of what my funding priorities are and what I've directed staff to how we allocate money we have? Nobody knows? Well, number one is people. You got to take care of the people we have. Okay? Let's take care of our people. They make the city work with nothing. Number 2 is our infrastructure. If we can't improve or buy new stuff or improve our infrastructure, at least if we maintain the infrastructure, what's holding everything up, we can make do until we get enough revenue. Number 3 is our facility. That's my priority order of how we fund things in the city. Just so you know, that's why things are being funded the way they are.
Any questions from council on general fund? I don't think any of this is a big surprise. We've been talking about it for nigh on 18 months now. So it's just putting some numbers to the higher level conversations that we've had. And hopefully it provides some parameters from which the community can make some decisions. So then looking to utility, sorry, this says general fund, but I apologize. It should say utility fund at the top. So when you look at the recommended salary adjustments for this department, it's about $25,000. Mr. Dominguez has asked to hire an additional public works technician, which we most definitely could use every single day. We currently have 3 individuals in the field, and for the depth and breadth of our public works systems, water and sewer, that's a lot of folks jumping from a lot of fires with not a lot of assistance. So a technician is about $45,000 base pay, doesn't include benefits. The ground storage water tank repair and replacement, last time we priced this, it was about $600,000. I'm sure those costs have gone up. The purchase of an all-terrain vehicle is also something that I would recommend to council that we look into. We have many miles of water lines that go back through property that we cannot access. So if we ever had to figure out where there's a break, or if we've had a leak, or if somebody has tapped in that they shouldn't, the gentleman can only drive so far, and then they have to get out and walk the rest of the way, and that's many miles to get to where they're going. And then they have to go back and get the supplies they need once they figure it out and come back. But if they had something that could navigate those areas and get in between the brush and drive back through there, then it would make our system safer and it would be a lot more efficient for what we're doing. And then stocking the shop with supplies, I put a round number of 25,000. I don't know that that's the correct number, but it is something to consider. So when you look at the total of the utility fund and the needs, you're at about $730,000. If you'll recall, just maintaining the base budget, we had a shortfall of about 50. We don't have the funds as it currently sits to deal with these needs. So I know that the ground storage water tanks and the pictures that we showed during our town halls were very concerning for our residents. So that's something we definitely want to figure out how we can fund that. And that is the biggest bulk of the cost in the increases in utility. Questions on this slide? So then, looking forward to things that we might want to consider as we move forward in our, not only this current year's budget process, but those to come, is we still have some thoughts and dreams about community event planning. As it currently stands, there's not a lot of funds available for it. So we'll have to see if that's something we can bring to reality. One of the things that we talked about briefly were the electronic signs in last year's budget. We realized those were a little higher than we expected, so we put that on pause. You may or may not have seen the vinyl signs that we had made that talks about mandatory water restrictions that are placed around town. That's at least helpful. We also have general city cleanup, which a code enforcement officer could be of assistance. Then when you look at the financial stewardship, the first one there is the review of that 0.5% of the local sales and use tax. So what are we doing there when we are using it as property tax offset rather than capturing that money and using it for operations or for crime control jurisdiction like we talked about? You as council have the ability to put that to the residents for a vote for certain uses. And back in 1988, this was put in place for the city. Maybe it made sense in 1988, but I don't think it does in 2024. And we're struggling to pay for basic services as it is, so we need to figure out how we're going to deal with this because we have a significantly lower ad valorem tax rate than any other city in this particular area per se that are providing the same level of services or close to the same level of services as Decatur, Bridgeport, Boyd, etc. But we've got that very low tax rate, and then we're further subsidizing that with the 0.5% of our sales and use tax. And that's really not effective for a community that's attempting to grow and provide basic public safety and other needs of the small city. We also have the half a cent per, or half 1/2% county sales and use tax. That's probably going to be a larger county vote. We've talked about that. All the cities in Rome, or excuse me, in Wise County are giving a half a cent to Wise County to also lower their property tax. I will tell you, in the research I did, Wise County does have one of the lowest taxes in the state of Texas. Not a bad thing, because our residents are also taxed as a county member, but we're getting relatively little service for that. Relatively little, like little. And to me, that frustrates me, because that sales and use tax that is coming in, if you saw on one of the first slides, we have that budgeted at $1.25 million a year. If we had $1.25 million a year to use, which is the full number of our sales and use tax, we wouldn't be having some of these issues that seems to frustrate the community, and we wouldn't be having some of the angst that goes along with maintaining our facilities or paying for events or having enough staffing so that if we have a fire or a police event, we've got folks. These are all things that we have to consider as we continue to straighten out our finances and determine what's best for Rome, because Rome's money is basically subsidizing everybody else in the county too. And I say that as a county member. I don't live in the city, but I benefit from your sales and use tax. So I know that the regional mayors meetings has discussed this, and it's a frustration for some of the mayors that I've heard there. It has its pluses and minuses, and it's not something that Rome can swing or make the decision to change all on its own. But the one that's the local sales and use tax, we can put that to the voters. And I have direction from you all to try and pursue that for the November ballot. And if it takes a couple of times for people to understand the importance of this, we may have to continue to educate, because it's a critical juncture for us as a city. Then when you look at public safety, we still need a generator for the fire department. We need body cameras to be upgraded for the police. The current ones are functional, but not very functional. And then generators for public works. So some of those are going to be mandated. We're not going to get a choice. So that is your base budget presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council has as it relates to the information you've been provided. It would be great if I could get some direction from you all on those last couple of slides as it relates to general fund and utility fund, as to what do you want me to pursue as it relates to those service delivery needs that I listed for you on slide 37 and 38. That's really the next direction I need.
Can you help me remember? I think we talked about this in budget meeting, but what can we do to help the utility fund?
The only thing that you have for the utility fund is to raise rates, both on water and sewer, or one or the other. You'll recall we talked about how for many years the sewer was kept flat at 11 and some odd cents, or excuse me, $11 and some odd cents, like 20 years ago. That should always be a slightly incremental increase every year, every 2 years. So we're dealing with that trajectory or path from that, because we've long been in the red in that fund, and we've subsidized it with general fund. So when you subsidize it with general fund, you then reduce the capacity in general fund, because you've taken out of the reserves of that fund, when your enterprise fund and utility fund is supposed to be solely driven on demand and user fees.
We talked about, I do remember now, how most raise that incrementally so as not to create panic and hardship on the
Absolutely.
community.
Yes.
So I guess I'm wondering, like, how do we do that? Does it require a voter? Is it just something the city does?
Something that council makes the decision to do. TRWA will be here, and they will explain all of that to you.
And you said they've done a water rate study,
Yes, ma'am.
and they're going to bring it to us next meeting. Okay.
Water and sewer.
Anything else in the budget?
So you said you needed direction on this. So, I mean, I know that we want to keep the people that are qualified and that are doing very well in the city. So I think the payroll adjustment for sure would be a priority for me anyway. Um, the CAD system, that's also a priority. Computer aided dispatch, where people know that where the police are, and they have when they're dispatched somewhere, it's on a computer.
They have the notes, and they're not trying to remember it over the radio on the fly while they're driving to events.
That provides a history too. Whenever they're heading to the call, instead of having to pull over and write this all into a Word document as they're getting dispatched to it, they can pull this up on the computer and say, okay, we've been out here X amount of times, we've dealt with them here. It smooths out a lot of that. I'm still shocked that we haven't had that.
That's just a safety issue for the officers too.
Yeah.
Amanda, if the voters were to approve the 1% recapture of the local sales and use tax, what kind of revenue would that create?
Half of 1.2 million, so about 600,000. Which, if it's put to a crime control district, that will, at least at the current numbers, pay for about 60% of the police budget, which then frees up that money for something else, if you so choose, wherever we need to use it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm just thinking about what can wait until November and what can't.
So the first three to me are most definitely recommendations that I have for council.
Well, the funding for dispatch services, if we're going to go into an ILA with Decatur, we're going to have to pay that, correct?
That's if council gives us direction to go with Decatur. That's not something that I have yet from council. That would be definitely my recommendation.
Yeah, I think we should pursue Decatur. Especially with Floyd, bringing that to our water tower, that's huge. So that make it a lot more safe for our guys on the radio too. Being able to actually get out on the radio if they need help.
We've heard repeatedly from citizens that yes, there's something needs to be done with the dispatch from White County.
It's been a challenge for sure. The next thing I might will bring to your attention is that code enforcement officer, if there is any way to fund that through a partnership with Aurora, that might make sense. The technology improvements I can go back to the vendor and have a further conversation with. And then the only three items left there are basically public safety investments.
I think police sergeant would probably be the next one that we really need. As much as I want two motors out here working traffic and bringing a lot of that accident claim stat down and a lot of the benefits, I still think probably need the sergeant first.
Yeah, but the problem is we don't have enough funds for.
I don't know. I kind of feel like with the revenue that's generated from the patrol officers for the motor unit, I kind of feel like that might.
It will offset, but not all.
No, not all.
I can do some additional analysis on some of these. I think once we have some firmer numbers as well as the revenue from this year and what we have in reserves, that will also help to inform some of council's decision. But you'll recall I don't recommend that we fund ongoing expenses with one-time money if we can at all avoid it, because we've put ourselves in a position to have a reduction in force if we continue to generate the same amount every year for operations out of the tax rate. Just $450,000 is not going to fund the things that the community wants, and so you're relying on sales and use tax for a lot of the monies.
The economy takes a downturn, we're going to lose that.
Which I know, I apologize, Mr. Loftus, but that's some of the reason why you all made the decision to hold the tax rate steady.
security, dispatch, and record management system. Is there some additional detail on the $10,000? For instance, is that a one-time expense? Is that a subscription? Ongoing?
Yes, there is.
That's a great question, Mr. Loftus. I will give you all the numbers at our next council meeting, but what that entails is, let me get to the notes here real quick. The initial outlay is for the initial setup of all of that. So that's your big expenses your first year. So what we have, the Decatur, y'all can hear me okay? The Decatur dispatch service is 45. We also have to do a radio reflash. The systems and professional services and also includes e-citations, which we would move to, is another 85, give or take. We can utilize the old computers we have now, but we're trying to avoid that because the upkeep on them is expensive. And we can go from $3,000 or almost $4,000 tough books to $600 Nook processors and with a standalone keyboard and monitor system. So I factored all that in. Basically, I factored all of this in for the first year, which this is a little low. My numbers right now is at 160, a little over 160, 160 and a half. The repeating cost, which you're concerned about, we expect Decatur to stay at 45 at least the second year. So I've worked this out for the second year. So it would be 45 plus the CAT and RMS licensing and upkeep is 11. So the total year over year, the second year, as I said, the first year is right around 160. Total year two cost estimate is 56, and that would be on.
160 for both dispatch and the CAD system.
Yes, 160, 648. That's everything. Yes, ma'am. Now that's an estimate, fluctuate a couple thousand here or there, but that's right at it. And then it drops to 56 for the second year and then on.
Any further discussion? Do you have anything else? Anybody?
Utility fund, I'm just thinking salaries for sure. But I'm worried about the fact that we're 50,000 in a deficit already.
That's going to be a hard conversation to have, and that's going to be a hard decision to make because, as I mentioned before, why we find ourselves in the position we find ourselves in today. Like I've said to you before, it's difficult to know what a previous council was thinking, why they chose the things that they did, but I just know that those decisions, we have not kept pace with that fund for pretty much any year I can find. And there may be some years just general analysis that revenue exceeded expenditures, but we never dealt with depreciation, which is why we now have free bonds that should be being paid out of utility fund being paid out of general fund. Those should all be over there in that enterprise because they're all infrastructure related, but we don't have the capacity. So we're going to have to make some tough decisions to deal with the issues of that we've kind of walked into we're dealing with now. And yes, we are at a deficit. Sometimes the revenues we're pretty good on. Sometimes the expenditures don't come in as high as we think, but there's a slight amount of money in there in fund balance. But again, the biggest cost on that ground storage water tank and replacement, that's going to be the biggest one for us to figure out, and we cannot continue to let this languish. You saw the rust, you saw the holes in the tanks, you saw the leaning tanks. We don't have a choice. This has been, as I've said to you before, the can has been kicked down the road so far that can is flat. And we've got to fix this.
And again, after having spent some time with these guys, the distance from the Bobo, where the water comes in at the Bobo plant, where it comes into Rome through all that back country. How these guys, and we're going to end up having to buy another pickup truck. If we don't, I mean, they can lease an ATV, buy an ATV, however you want to do it. But trying to go out, that's a long way. And with only the few people they have, they spend most of their time just doing water with stuff.
I get it. All of these things are a priority, and all of these things we need, but we need money to pay for them.
Well, and I,
Which means there's going to be some very unpalatable decisions that are going to have to be made very quickly. And yeah, if we want, I mean, everybody wants what they want, but they understand it comes with a cost. And we just can't keep kicking the can down the road. So yeah, it's going to be some hard decisions that have to be made.
so I can, on utility fund, I can certainly factor in making sure our current staff members are prioritized. And as we move further in the budget process, and hopefully as we have some direction on the ground storage water tanks and what might be available to us, maybe the rest will become clear. I don't have to have a total 1 through 10 decision today. I don't like to bring you this information. I would much rather be able to say, yes, we can do all these things that you'd like to do. But it just isn't possible within the current financial constraints that we have.
When do we have to make a decision regarding the half-cent sales tax being valid? What is the deadline?
Carbon's researching that for me, and I'm hopeful to get some information.
Yeah, I think we agreed that it would go to leaders.
We talked about that at the budget retreat.
So are we, so we really can't do anything about the funding for dispatch service right now because we don't have the tower, the thing, thank you, the repeater. So
It wouldn't be
sit
till
there.
October 1.
Okay.
So this is with the next fiscal year.
But for right now, we could say to find the money for the CAD system.
Yes, we do have, I think, some one-time funds that we can pay for both the CAD RMS first year and the dispatch first year. And not to throw more on the plate, one of the things that we recently also discussed was City Hall lease is up. And we either need to re-up the lease and continue to try and make the best of that space. It's pretty small, it's 1,100 square feet. Or we need to consider leasing or purchasing a modular building and potentially putting it out here in front of the old school. And we have pursued some numbers on that, and I can bring that back to council at a later time.
Yep.
Since budget discussion is on the list, can we go ahead and make a motion to utilize the one-time fund?
Well,
It is in the budget?
no, the expansion on the service delivery needs for the CAD RMS and the dispatch, it's part of the budget discussions for next year, and so yes, you can make a motion to pull this out and direct me to start those negotiations.
Do you want to have a motion?
I move to utilize one-time funds to go ahead and start the negotiations for the CAD records management system and the funding for the dispatch service.
Do I have a second? Second. Go for a vote?
Aye.
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 Motion carried.
Thank you.
We have no further discussion. Do you have any more comments, Amanda?
No, sir.
Can I just say something real quick?
Chief.
I just want to thank you guys. That wasn't on tonight's agenda, but y'all recognize the importance and seriousness of officer safety, and that's pretty awesome. So,
And let me clarify, it was on the agenda. It just wasn't anticipated that we'd have a decision necessarily this quickly, and it will go a long way with the staff. I worry about them, and I know we just went to a social at the Chief's house on July 4th, and I got to meet families and kids and of our officers, and this is a wonderful thing to invest in them and to show the support for those people who literally give up their life to this community every day.
Thank you guys too, but Right there with my number one priority for funding, the people. We got to keep the people and protect the people. Unless we have anything else, do we have anything for future agendas? And remember, the rest of this year, the more we pile on our agendas, because budget is going to take up a lot of our time. So make sure it is something that is a priority for the city. If you want it on there, get it on there. But meetings are going to be adjusted to accommodate it. So, anybody else have anything they want to add to a future agenda?
I'd like to see the guy we spoke to earlier about the lot.
Mr. King?
Yes. I'd like to see that on there. What you told earlier.
My apologies. That's my take your medicine so you can sleep at night.
And that's very important. I will put that on a future agenda item, and I'll let Carvin speak to some of those options. He will know better than I will what might or might not be possible.
Yeah, I share the same concern because we have older lots that are soon to be grandfathered in. So,
Well, even some of the older lots I have found, and this is not abnormal for a small city. You may get a particularly large lot, and you have the primary home, and then somebody builds a grandmother home, and then all of a sudden you got 2 or 3 on the lot, and it was never zoned for that or replatted for that. And we're untangling those knots as we go along as well. So I think that's some of the challenge that we're dealing with. I know when I spoke to Mr. King, it was my understanding that this lot was sold in a package of lots. And yes, the seller disclosed some information that was incorrect.
And if we're talking about sales of property that might need to be in executive session, or
I can talk to Carvin and see what that looks like.
Sale or the purchase, because we also have spoken about parts of Old Town and the vision for making that something, an area that people want to come to.
yes, more along the lines of purchasing.
Well, we'll get that on the future agenda because we can only talk about what was on the agenda tonight. I mean, not trying to blow the guy off and not give him options, but we're not allowed to discuss that. Has anybody else got anything for the future agenda?
I think for the August 8th meeting, I want to bring back, I guess, keep it broad at the moment, the city ordinances, updating, maybe adding a bit more info to the
I have two, or whenever the time will allow between with the budget talks going on. Once what we need to address and get ahead of now is short-term rental policy and ordinance covering that, and a panhandling ordinance. I'd like to get ahead of that because as we grow, it's coming.
Now, when you say panhandling, are you talking just general individuals, or are you talking similar to what the fire department used to do with fill the beach?
No, not what the fire department does. I'm talking about general individuals.
Well, the fire department's not going to do that anymore, but I know we've had some other folks. So do you want that as part of the whole conversation?
No.
Just individuals?
Yeah.
And I think we did do an ordinance for short-term rental.
We talked about it, but it was tabled.
Oh, it was before you, I think.
It may be, but I know since I've been here, I brought it up early on and it was tabled.
No, okay, I remember that.
Time is running together, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I mean, all right, if there's no further, does anybody else have anything for the future agenda? If not, I will ask if there's anyone who likes to make a motion that we adjourn.
Make a motion.
Do we have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned at 8:03.